Getting ready for liftoff. T-minus 2 minutes. This is Spartan Command. Stand by for liftoff. 3, 2, 1, 0.
In December of 1972, 3 astronauts blasted off on the last Apollo mission to the moon. As Earth receded behind them, the astronauts took these pictures of what NASA calls the blue marble. Earth appears as an azure globe suspended in darkness. The images captured our planet's beauty and majesty and the fragility of its atmosphere.
To see it with your own eyes, this beautiful planet, this really thin piece of atmosphere and the very black abyss that's beyond it.
5 decades later, astronauts glimpse the blue marble daily from the International Space Station, or ISS, orbiting 420 kilometers above. The space station sustains a crew of 7 astronauts who live, eat, and work aboard. Crew members run experiments to advance science, medicine, and knowledge of travel in deep space. A key task is to learn how to produce food in space, bringing those learnings back home to planet Earth to enhance food security for all humankind. The U.S. Aeronautics and Space Administration, better known as NASA, has always strived to feed crews well. This means creating healthy, tasty foods, able to stay fresh for years under the most extreme conditions.
Strawberry shortcake.
Oh, excellent.
At base, NASA food scientists develop ingredients and recipes for astronauts to consume and enjoy in microgravity.
I think everybody has a different experience when it comes to food. The common thought among astronauts is that food tastes different in space. I'm not really certain that I felt there was a big difference between the two.
On missions, astronauts follow a detailed daily schedule, planned to the minute.
Days are very long, up early in the morning, working all day long on science. But we also have to exercise a couple hours every day in order to maintain our bone density and muscle mass. And then we're the repairmen too. We're the plumbers, the electrician, the mechanic, and then some cool stuff too, like spacewalks and using robotic arms to capture flying vehicles.
What's on the menu tonight?
Strawberry shortcake. We have these butter cookies and some strawberries with a little bit of milk on top.
After a day on the job, food is a favorite comfort.
We could all gather around the table, and that's a very nice feature. Once you get on board, there's a really wide selection of the different kinds of foods. And then some of the foods come in prepackaged containers, kind of like the military meals ready to eat. Once you cut open that container and you're using a spoon, you kind of have to be careful because otherwise it's going to fly around. And it happens, it's kind of a normal part, but you get more skilled about how do you eat in zero gravity. And at the end of the day, it is like camping food. And anybody who's been on a camping trip for a couple of weeks, after about 2 weeks of camping food, you're really craving something, fresher or different.
But new varieties of space food are being constantly developed back at base. Shi Le Wu is food manager for the ISS. She works to improve the eating experience in space.
I'm opening the Mexican scrambled egg. This is something we teach crew members to do in microgravity, is when they tear open the package, don't open all the way, so that the package would be one piece instead of two. And this is how the Mexican scrambled egg look like. use a syringe to get up 75 ml of water as directed, and then go straight in. Once we add the water into the food becomes soft immediately. And then let it set for 5 to 10 minutes to allow the rehydration go through the whole product.
Very good.
NASA pioneered many food preservation technologies now in wide commercial use. One is freeze drying, which renders food edible for years. Freeze drying was first developed for the Apollo missions in the late 1960s. Food safety is also a top priority.
Food poisoning cannot be tolerated in space because they have very limited medical resource, and this could result in loss of mission. Food safety at NASA is worked through the HACCP system.
HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. Using this safety management system, providers can identify hazards and devise ways to avoid them all along the line, from production to consumption. The system was developed through collaboration between NASA and the Pillsbury Company.
This concept was actually conceived back in 1960s, and the original guideline was written with a space hardware system in mind. And now, HACCP has become an industry standard that being used worldwide to ensure food safety and provide consumer a safe product free from potential physical, chemical, and biological contaminants.
With longer missions in mind, NASA aims to extend space food shelf life from about 3 years today to 5 years or longer in the future. But relying only on packaged food may not be enough. Crews would need to grow some of what they eat. Ralph Frischie spent more than 40 years with the U.S. manned space programs.
Is that just a setup issue, or is that a reliability of sensor issue?
He's now developing reliable, sustainable systems for growing fresh food on long space missions.
And so it's now trying to figure out how do we devise, develop the systems that will get put on exploration vehicles, and what kind of plants would we grow to support the crew needs.
For decades, scientists have been working to find the most efficient and effective methods for growing plants. But in space, plants have to contend with a very different set of conditions, like microgravity.
We know the roots tend to want to grow down in the direction of gravity, but we use light. So the canopy of the plants, the leaves themselves are always focusing towards the light, and the roots are trying to get access to water and air. And so that's the way we've organized things to date, is we put that as the growth media for the plants to grow in. So they'll grow in that media. And if you look on orbit and see photographs of plants growing in some of the facilities we have, they'll look very much like terrestrial plants growing in that regard.
NASA developed a system for plant and crop research called Veggie. The International Space Station has 2 active Veggie units humming away.
It's really a very basic and simple system. It consists of a light cap so that the plants have light at the top, and fans to actually move the air around, because in a microgravity environment, there is no convection. And then it's just a system where we can actually put what we call plant pillows, which are filled with the soil and pre-seeded, and then we water them and they grow.
In the 1980s, NASA reworked an altitude chamber used for flight simulations to grow plants. That idea, meant for space travel, spawned new technologies in environmentally controlled agriculture, like hydroponics and vertical farming, now in wide use on Earth.
It became, in effect, the first vertical farm, and in that facility, they learned how to grow potatoes hydroponically. And so we've really done a job in terms of trying to take some of these early spaceflight preparatory experiments with plants and then push that into the commercial controlled environment agriculture arena, and also helping with field agriculture.
Amid climate change and resource scarcity, controlled environment agriculture could be a lifeline for global food security. By 2030, this sector could be worth $100 billion US.
I think that everything we do for NASA with food relates perfectly to what we're going to be looking to have to do on the Earth in the next 20 or 30 years. All we're doing is trying to figure out how to feed 4 people by the year 2050, whereas the farmers, the people working in the controlled environment agriculture world, they're looking at potentially feeding a terrestrial population of 10 billion people in that same time. So we're all working together for the same ultimate goal, which is how do I feed a population or a crew and keep them healthy and operating at peak performance.
Mars. The red planet has always fascinated humans. With advancements in technology and space exploration, the dream of reaching Mars is becoming a reality. However, Mars-bound astronauts won't have options to restock provisions during their years-long journeys. They will be able to grow greens. But where will they get much-needed protein? In Finland, at a lab outside Helsinki, food scientists grow a new form of nutrition, one which they hope will sustain astronauts in deep space and, in time, feed planet Earth.
In space research, you are forced to invent sustainable systems, and then they can be applied on planet Earth.
In what resembles a home brewery, a local startup is creating protein out of nothing but air.
Our main product is called Solein. Solein is actually very natural because the organism what we are using is a non-modified gift from the nature. We have found it from the nature. Therefore, its nutritional composition is also very similar to what we are eating today.
Solein production begins in a fermenter with microbes. Renewable electricity captures CO2 and water molecules from the air, then splits them into hydrogen and oxygen. In the fermenter, the microbes are fed carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and mineral nutrients. They produce a solution that is heated at 140 degrees Celsius to dry out the liquid, leaving a paste rich in protein and micronutrients.
You end up with a dried powder like this that is nutritionally very close to dried meat, dried carrot, or dried soy.
Solein can be used to make protein products like plant-based meat, tofu, cheeses, and spreads. It could even replace eggs in pastries. Solein would be a highly sustainable feedstock, one that needs minimal land, water, and other resources. Solein's key ingredient is abundant on Earth: carbon dioxide.
What we need for our production is basically electricity and air. Electricity we do have everywhere on the planet, quite evenly distributed in the form of wind power and solar power. And air, with the direct air capture technology, we can milk for water and carbon dioxide anywhere on the planet.
A Solar Foods mega factory is now in the works. It will produce 100 tons of Solein per year.
At our first factory, we are going to have a direct air capture device. So by walking around, you donate carbon dioxide that we capture and use as a raw material in food production. Similar way, we could actually connect our carbon capture and food production to any building, for example, shopping center in the future.
Food products containing soline could soon reach stores as early as 2024, starting in Singapore. Known as a foodie's paradise and one of the first countries to grant regulatory approval for novel sustainable foods, like plant-based protein and cultivated meat.
From Singapore perspective, it is of course an environment where food technologies are welcomed. We can see it's the leading hub on the planet for food technology to go to market. The second is of course local ambitious and targets and strategy of Singapore as an exercise similar to maybe with space, where you have limited land use, minimal resources, and you would need to do very efficient food production. And we could actually go literally in the middle of city to produce food locally.
Not just cities. Soline could be made anywhere where resources are scarce, even in space. Dr. Arttu Luukkonen is working on a prototype bioreactor for producing soline aboard spacecraft.
And the reason for that is that we utilize waste products that are already present in the space habitat. So, as an example, the carbon dioxide we capture from the cabin air, it's exhaled by the astronauts as they breathe.
The average astronaut exhales a kilogram of carbon dioxide a day. Collected by direct capture technology, that CO2 goes into onboard bioreactors to make soline. And the spacecraft's waste management system collects and processes the astronauts' bodily waste. Byproducts such as water, carbon dioxide, ammonia, and minerals are discharged and recycled as ingredients, making a circular system.
And we probably will not dry powder as the end product because very fine dry powder in microgravity could be a difficult thing to handle. So what we envision is a blend of water and soline that you could turn into, say, a protein shake quite easily.
Space research actually could have practical meaning also on planet Earth, because we could spin from there autonomous devices, maybe container-sized devices for refugee camps and for those locations under broken logistics.
How was
This
it?
is great. Protein.
Yeah.
Doing something like this in food technology is important because about 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions to human action is due to what we eat. Therefore, food technology can solve the largest environmental problem and challenge what we have on planet Earth.
Novel foods could be the cuisine of the future in space and on Earth. So could an ancient natural species.
Mushrooms are just fascinating. Fungi are fascinating.
The fungi, kingdom is massive, and so mushrooms are so many different things.
Edward and Natalie Dale hunt mushrooms. They're amateur mycologists studying and growing fungi as a hobby.
This is where we found some good ones last time.
In a forest near their home, they're looking for new varieties to study.
These are a oyster type of mushroom. You can see oyster mushrooms are saprophytic, and that means that they decompose dead wood. So they're a great candidate to go to space because they're gonna break stuff down. If you give them food, they're gonna break it down and turn it into, proteinaceous, nutritious mushrooms.
Mushrooms have many uses. They can be a source of nutrition, used in medicine, as fabric, building materials, and even biofuel. The Dales' hobby has spawned a thriving mushroom farm in their garage. It's small, but highly productive.
So one of the things we like to do after foraging some mushrooms is take a spore print. The mycology came about because we started growing mushrooms, and if you're on a farm, you have plenty of space. Growing mushrooms, you can produce a large quantity of them, and the waste can be composted. It's not a problem. But let's say you are in a urban environment, a food desert, or in space. You have a very restrictive footprint, and so that space becomes very important, and the waste becomes critical. And so mycology came about as a way of a method to continuously produce mushrooms in an incredibly small footprint. And so that's really the sort of light bulb moment of maybe there's a way we can do this better, that we actually are able to produce much more mushrooms for a certain amount of starting material. And that's where we started in this garage.
Traditional mushroom farming requires a substrate, a layer within which the mushrooms feed, live, and grow. That substrate is discarded after one use. Mycology uses a reusable substrate scaffold onto which a nutrient-rich liquid medium is injected. The scaffold is then inoculated, producing mycelium, a substance that gives rise to mushrooms. The mushrooms are harvested, and the system repeats itself. This highly efficient cycle continuously produces food in a small area, just the ticket for astronauts voyaging in deep space.
I think that's another reason why mushrooms are such a good space food, is because they're so variable. Like there's so many different varieties of mushrooms, and they have such different tastes and textures, but that they still provide the vitamins, the minerals, and the amino acids that the astronauts are going to need on a long-term mission.
How long has that guy been going now?
I think like 4 months.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's happy, and those are huge.
The idea for taking mycology into space came from the Dale's friend, Nicholas Vermeulen.
The truth is, we don't consume a lot of mushrooms as a culture. We think there's a lot of value in consuming mushrooms because it's basically one of the big food groups that we're just not investing in.
The substrate is just the same grain that you've been using for everything else.
The startup's chief scientist has a background in organic chemistry and food science.
You don't have to worry about the tiny pins.
They don't matter.
They're not going to.
One thing that is pretty interesting is mushrooms have been alive for a very long time. Like, it's a very old kingdom of life. And there are some really, really old mushroom colonies that we know of. Some have dated to be about 5,000 years old, which means that they should be fairly resilient, which means that there's a really good chance that they will continue to grow in space, even with solar radiation and like other extreme events that are up there.
All right. Bon appetit. Enjoy.
Yeah, man, that is actually pretty good, though.
Foods like soline and mushrooms are fueling advances into the ultimate frontier. But what other gifts does space hold for us? Agriculture and the global food supply chain are reeling from environmental problems and other disruptions. Impelled by rising food insecurity, scientists are struggling for solutions. From Vienna, the capital of Austria, a scientist sets off on a crucial new research path. Dr. Shobha Sivashankar has spent a quarter of a century in international agricultural development. These labs study mutant varieties of seeds. To date, they have collected data from more than 3,000 varieties from over 200 plant species worldwide.
So the IAEA Plant Breeding and Genetics Department is part of that joint FAO-IAEA center. and its mandate is to support member states with agricultural production and productivity. And for plant breeding and genetics, it's specifically crop production, so crop improvement for improving the yield of crops, stabilizing the yield under pressures of climate change, under pressures of diseases, pests, everything.
Plant breeders often use radiation to induce mutations that alter a specimen's DNA and physical characteristics. Mutation could result in more resilient crops and higher yields.
If you really need to be aiming at developing varieties that would be one level better than what exists previously, then you have to bring these induced mutations. But then there is a selection process that you're selecting for that particular trait and also trying to combine all of the favorable traits that have been there previously. So it's only when, there is an adaptation need for an organism in an environment that is constantly pressuring it, then it would evolve as well. And then finally you have a seed or a variety that the farmer can cultivate.
Inducing mutation through radiation takes years and varies by crop. The agency is sending seeds into space, hoping to accelerate the process. In November 2022, scientists loaded onto a spacecraft seeds of 2 species, sorghum and Arabidopsis. Arabidopsis and sorghum seeds were chosen because there was a large bank of genetic knowledge available to draw upon for comparison. In space, the seeds undergo exposure to microgravity, radiation, extreme heat, and cold. High-energy particles and radiation affects the seed's genetic material. This brings on mutations or chromosomal changes. Back on Earth, the altered seeds sprout into new variants, different from their Earth-bound parent species.
Our colleagues in China have been doing this for a while, and they've sent several hundreds of species of seed in 2008 through a recoverable satellite, and that orbited for 15 days and came back. And they're using that seed to be breeding. But the breakthrough research is that they have a wheat variety that is currently grown in China, which takes up the second largest wheat area in China. And this came from space breeding.
In 2021, the Singapore Food Agency sent coriander seeds from Singapore to the International Space Station, a popular ingredient in most Asian cuisines. The plants grown from seeds that returned from space were heavier and longer, showing that breeding in space could deliver better crops.
So one of the points that would be of relevance here is that we have a zero hunger planned for 2030. Is that possible or not? So we are all moving towards that. Each and every country is moving towards that. And that is why technologies like mutation breeding are very important, because that's a very accessible technology for everybody. And it produces what is necessary, the genetic diversity that is necessary to get an improved variety.
Dr. Shobha feels her work is a calling, fulfilling a vow she made to her late father.
One of the things that he was asking me was that once you finish your PhD, are you going to be able to help the poor farmers of this world? I promised him that I would help. I would do something to help the poor farmers. So since then, I've not looked back.
Mutating seeds in space can be daunting and costly, fraught with bureaucratic tangles and restricted to a select few. A Houston, Texas-based company is working on changing that.
So right now on the SpaceX capsule is about to unbirth.
We make it easier for people to access space. That allows us to have experiments out in a vacuum and exposed to both the vacuum and radiation or what we're currently working on to build a private or commercial space station.
I don't like doing that.
Yeah.
With the scope, you can actually watch the solder.
Yeah.
Former NASA astronaut Tim Kopra is CEO of NanoRacks. He and his team of engineers and designers believe in easier commercial access to space. NanoRacks launches cube satellites and facilitates experiments for commercial clients on the International Space Station.
I think as humans, we're designed to explore. Like, it's in our DNA. And then when you connect the dots between that desire to explore with something that you think improves humanity, it really gives you a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
Mike, how's it going?
Too bad.
How's the innovation work going?
Oh, innovating like crazy.
Oh, yeah? That's good. As you should be.
Mike Lewis oversees creative and technical solutions as Chief Innovation Officer. He and his team closely monitor experiments in space from the company's Mission Control Center.
For the SPDM to get down there and attach to it once it's out on the slide table, right?
Yeah. Used to be maybe over the course of a career, you'd fly one experiment to space. And now we've been able to fly over 1,300 experiments. Researchers have flown multiple experiments. Really, space is just another place to do science. We fly a lot of seeds, which is fascinating because you get different results once seeds have been exposed to the radiation of space. Space is a really important part of understanding food and understanding how food processes work. We learn a lot about how plants grow in space. We learn a lot about human interaction with food in space. And in my opinion, all these experiments we're flying, these are the steps we're taking towards basically changing the way we look at food, the way we are able to feed people on Earth. We do this research in space because it positively affects everybody on Earth.
Some of the chocolate chips melted.
NanoRacks designers came up with the Bishop Airlock Module, a chamber that can add more space to the International Space Station and enable experiments to be done in the atmosphere of outer space.
It's a volume that attaches to the space station, and then we pressurize it and open the hatch, and it becomes habitable volume of the space station. Then we're able to close that hatch, depressurize it, and a robotic arm comes and removes the entire airlock, so it's exposed to the vacuum of space. We can do things like deploy, but it also allows us to bring in things from the outside of the space station that previously would require an astronaut to go out there and work on it. So it's a really important innovation for the space station.
Research on how seeds react to conditions in space could help grow food in an earthbound environment just as inhospitable to agriculture. The United Arab Emirates has to import up to 90% of its food.
I wouldn't be as worried about this section. I would be.
Experts from Starlab Oasis, a startup under NanoRacks, is using space tech to try to change this.
Would you, you're also going to have roots that are coming off of this.
At Starlab Oasis, we want to push this envelope further and see, where the boundaries lie and how we can go further. So, developing new crop varieties through mutation breeding in space, technology, both development and perfection through utilizing in space. All of these will have immediate impact to, the terrestrial agricultural activities we have here on Earth. And that is really at the pinnacle of what Starlab Oasis is doing, utilizing the space environment for the benefit of humanity.
In 2019, the UAE Space Agency teamed with NanoRacks to fly date palm seeds to the International Space Station. These tough, striking trees and their fruit are deeply rooted in the nation's culture. By exposing these seeds to microgravity and radiation in space, the hope was to develop a more resilient and productive crop for cultivation in deserts.
Whether it be deep space radiation, microgravity, launch vibrations, all of these things affect plants' biology as it does all of our biology. And so we're looking at, are there any benefits that can come from that, especially for some of these harsher environments, whether it be salt, heat, or drought, and making sure that we're able to use that to our advantage to help with reversing desertification and making sure that we're able to continue to thrive here in the desert.
The UAE sees space as a way to help move beyond an oil-based economy and address environmental issues in fresh ways.
I'd say the UAE is a very forward-thinking country. So even though, a lot of resources have come from oil in the past, they're always forward-thinking, understanding what industries are going to be important, not only in the next 5 to 10 years, but 50 and 100 years as well. Furthermore, this region, compared to the rest of the world, is expected to have the highest population boom in the coming years. This population boom also happens more in urban environments that are much further away to food sources than, living in rural areas. So with that, space was a natural answer. And in the short time that the UAE has been a spacefaring nation, they've accomplished a lot.
Climate change, supply chain disruptions, and a growing population pose serious threats to food security. Space tech and food science have delivered innovative foods that make food production more resilient and sustainable. But scaling up these experimental advances demands time and will. One Singapore-based entrepreneur is working to improve agriculture today.
I am from Uruguay, and when I was 12 years old, there was this very big epidemic of foot and mouth disease. Foot and mouth disease is an illness that affects livestock, and Uruguay's main export, even today, are livestock products. So the country went into an economic crisis that affected not only the rural sector, but actually the whole country, and actually the whole region, including Brazil, Argentina. And I started thinking, how could there be a system capable of detecting when the animals are sick on time to prevent this from happening? So this, I have with me 10 devices that are transmitting right now. So this device...
Victoria Alonso Perez created a tool for minding livestock from the comfort of her home.
ChipSaver is a platform where we can monitor livestock remotely and autonomously. And what we do is we have our own proprietary smart sensor that goes attached to a collar around the neck of the animal. With this, we can know the GPS, so the location of the animals at all times, but also we can know the behavior of the animal and send a warning if an anomaly is detected to warn the farmer so that they can take action in time.
ChipSaver uses GPS technology developed for military applications in the 1970s. 24 satellites circle the Earth, transmitting signals that provide pinpoint locations worldwide. GPS is a fixture on cell phones and other devices, but it has only now been used for animals. ChipSaver is a tracking device that's used to keep a close eye on individual animals' movements in herds. The system tracks an animal's behavior and location, collecting, storing, and transmitting the data to a platform accessible worldwide.
So here I put just some boundaries, which would be what the farm is, and then I put some perimeter. So if any of these devices would go outside of this perimeter, we will get an alert immediately, which is very important for cattle theft. It means that either an animal went wandering around or an animal being stolen. So I can know exactly where it was, which is so important for the farmers to know. Like farmers have been telling us that they are saving on gas, for example, because they just see the animals there and they don't really have to go around. So this is something very important for them.
A coming ChipSaver product will let armchair cowboys monitor the health of livestock.
We have the boluses. This go inside of the animal, and it has a temperature sensor, so you can know the real temperature of the animal. This goes through the mouth and stays there for the entire life of the animal, transmitting. Welcome back, everyone. Up next, we have the Space Agency.
Victoria couldn't find a suitable manufacturer for her product, until she visited Singapore.
I would say classical approach to cooperation.
It was Jonathan Hung who introduced her to opportunities in the local space sector.
The space industry in Singapore is growing. Started off largely with the universities, institutes of higher learning, and predominantly has been in satellite research. That has actually evolved quite well over recent years. The satellite programs have taken off. We have launched 19 satellites, and counting to space already, many of which have been successfully deployed. We have a very strong foundation of electronics. Right? And largely, we have doubled down and discussed in satellite manufacturing, satellite research, satellite R&D. That requires a lot of electronics fundamentals and core capabilities. And I think we have a lot of those kind of critical talent and domain expertise residing within Singapore.
Hey Channing, how's everything going? I see that you have some updates.
Yeah.
Today I came to meet Channing, who is the CEO and founder of New Space, which is a Singapore company that is building satellites here in Singapore. And so New Space has helped us design and develop these new devices, which we're using right now, but also designing the next generation of the devices.
We have 3D printed multiple casings to try and figure out whether we can fit the electronics inside and make it smaller, make the overall device smaller.
It's amazing that we can have a smaller case because that means that we can use it in more animals.
Yeah. What happened was that Victoria needed someone to help develop the hardware for her. So what we did is we worked with her, came up with the requirement matrix for her trackers, and then we designed the hardware as well as the software to go with those trackers.
ChipSafer was born out of Victoria's passion for space technology.
Very passionate about space, but not just the space of being an astronaut and going to space, but actually understanding more of the universe. My passion started when I was 4 years old. My dad is an accountant, and every single day he would write numbers on a very big piece of paper. And I asked him what was those numbers for. So he took me to the window, and that was a full moon day, and he showed me the moon. And my dad told me that humans had been able to go to the moon with the combination of just 2 numbers, zeros and 1. And I was so impressed. And from that day on, I became completely obsessed with space technology. So I see that these amazing technologies that we have from space are going to enable a more sustainable and a more equitable world than the one that we have today.
This lab is working on just such a technology, designed to make agriculture in space and Earth much more efficient.
How's everything? Yeah, we are waiting the concrete to set.
Professor Tan Swee Ching and team have created a hydrogel able to hold large amounts of water.
Hydrogel, as what the name suggests, is a gel that is able to absorb and retains water. They absorb gaseous state of water, that is water vapor. Once the hydrogel absorbs moisture from the air, it will store within the gel itself until heat is applied to it to release the water back into the environment.
I can transfer that to a smaller concrete.
Professor Tan's hydrogel can absorb 15 times as much moisture from the air as traditional desiccants like silica gel.
So therefore, what we are trying to do is that we are able to collect that water that is released from the hydrogel, then we will be able to use the water for drinking, for farming, and for many other applications.
To show how the gel works, the professor and his team built a model smart farm that harvests water on its own. The smart farm is a container with a movable cover. The hydrogel goes into a flat sponge tray. At night, the cover opens, allowing the gel to absorb 3 times its weight in moisture from the atmosphere. During the day, the cover closes, holding in water vapor. Heat from the sun condenses the vapor, and droplets fall into the soil, providing gentle and constant irrigation.
The hydrogel can be used to absorb moisture release from the plants during transpirations, and then use it to water back the plants again. So that could help to save up lots of water during the farming process.
At a Mars Mission Simulation Center located on a volcanic peak in Hawaii, scientists saw ways to use hydrogel to irrigate plants on Mars.
I developed a plant growth chamber box that would allow me to grow plants during my mission at High Seas. And a part of this box would be the ability to insert Dr. Tan and the SWE Lab's hydrogel into the system to absorb humidity from the air and see, after removed, if we could desorb or kind of remove the water from the hydrogel and be able to use that to recycle the water to put it back into the irrigation system.
So they managed to grow some leafy vegetables over there, and they even tasted the vegetables that they have grown. It was a perfect experiment.
Professor Tan is exploring other ways to use the gel as a dehumidifying agent in paint to lower ambient temperatures in urban environments, or even generate drinking water.
Desalination is a high energy intensive process. So if we could produce drinking water by the use of my hydrogel, just by simply absorbing moisture from the air, that would be energy saving.
Besides expanding knowledge of the universe, space tech affects daily life. More technologies like these could deliver unexpected new solutions. By harnessing the science behind the drive to find new worlds, we can bring a better future here on Earth.